So what exactly could this reported move from the United States mean? Well, to talk about it all, I'm joined in studio by international affairs analyst Dan Perry, former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press, as well as the former chairman for the Foreign Press Association in Jerusalem. Dan, thanks for being with us tonight. When it comes from this reported move from the U.S., they clearly haven't commented on anything yet, but now new reports coming out that it's not necessarily sanctions they would be looking at on this battalion, but instead barring them from receiving any sort of aid when it comes to this massive aid. What exactly is the difference there then?
Well, money is fungible, so you can't even prove that aid went to them if it goes to someone else and frees up money for them. It looks like a slap on the wrist and a sort of signal of something. Notwithstanding the fact that it is extraordinary. I could be wrong, but I don't think there is a historical precedent for a particular unit being singled out for any kind of legal action or censure of this kind by in a democratic country, at least. So it's not meaningless, but certainly it's the tip of the potential iceberg, and it reflects something very interesting, which is that even though Israel is enduring tremendous reputational damage, fairly or unfairly, because of the Gaza war, fundamentally, Israel's policies vis-a-vis Gaza, which were to pull out and hope for the best and mete out punishment when aggressed, is not indefensible. Whereas, and has wide support in the world. Whereas the policies in the West Bank, even more so the settlement of the West Bank than the occupation, but also the military occupation, are much more difficult to defend internationally. So even though Israel is being tarred and feathered over Gaza, the real problem in the future is really about the West Bank, unless Israel aims to reoccupy Gaza, which I doubt it does. And that's going to have to be really taken into account as Israel figures out the post-war plan and what it wants to do strategically. Does it really want to keep things as they are in the West Bank, which is an undemocratic situation where 500,000 Jews have voting rights and 3 million Palestinians do not, and they're so angry that terrorism happens, and then you need to have a clampdown, and some of it is brutal, and then you get charged with human rights abuses. This whole thing is a debacle, and I don't think it's long-term sustainable at all. So it's a signal of that issue, which is waiting around the wings and will certainly come.
But it does tie into the whole complex issue, as you mentioned, with the day after in Gaza. It's also the current day in the West Bank, because if not the IDF, the Palestinian Authority who has been there has still allowed this terrorism to run rampant in the West Bank in some parts.
I disagree. It hasn't allowed it to run rampant. The PA is not a particularly powerful force. And it's not allowed to be powerful by the Oslo Accords and the subsequent specific deals, meaning by Israel. Israel's not giving them tanks and planes. There is terrorism there, and you're right, that the PA alone would fail to completely subdue it. But the main thing that's indefensible, as I say, is a long-term situation where Israel keeps settling the territory, and it's looking like it has no intention of leaving, and that will leave millions of Palestinians disenfranchised, angry, certain to sprout terrorist efforts, and it's a recipe for never-ending mayhem. I am very well aware that Israel cannot just pull out of Gaza right now, out of the West Bank right now, given the Gaza precedent. Can you just imagine what would happen if the PA were to be defeated in a post-IDF West Bank like it was by Hamas in Gaza, and then Israel would face an ISIS-like entity surrounding Jerusalem, abutting Jerusalem on three sides, and perched on the foothills overlooking Tel Aviv from 20 miles away, from 30 kilometers away. That's ridiculous, and it can't be contemplated now. But a continuation of the move towards creating one state without giving the Palestinian citizenship and making Israel therefore 30-40% Arab is just not going to fly. I know it won't. And so these sanctions against the extremist settlers, and they're a problem in and of themselves, and this bizarre but meaningful, yet ultimately symbolic move that appears to be coming against the unit, as I say, is a harbinger of things to come. Israel has major strategic issues which perhaps oddly, given all the agitation over Gaza, do not really involve Gaza. Although, I mean, there's Palestinians there, but the focus of the agitation, I think, will be in the West Bank.
Well, speaking of that agitation we're certainly seeing the ramifications of it felt abroad right now. There's anti-Semitism surging at the most prestigious universities in the United States. Classes are being held virtually at Columbia University today over safety concerns after anti-Israel, anti-Jewish protesters have taken over the campus. The school's campus Orthodox rabbi has urged Jewish students to go home, leave the campus over fear of physical violence. Now, similar protests popped up at Yale. Police officers in riot gear started arresting protesters who set up tents in a so-called Gaza Plaza Liberated Zone for the past several days. But even with this police action now, many are outraged. Police departments and university have allowed these types of anti-Semitic, hateful protests to take place for days now. So what exactly could this mean for the campus culture that we're seeing? The videos, Dan, coming out. These are hateful people, anti-Semitic people, many of them, but still the campuses don't seem to be able to get a control over what's happening on their universities.
Well, they've let it go pretty far in the name of freedom of speech. And one wonders if the speech in question were by the Ku Klux Klan trying to restore slavery, or even on behalf of religious groups trying to ban gay marriage, if they would be equally as tolerant of lunacy on the principle of freedom of speech. They went that way, and now they're paying the price. And I think there is, some buyer's remorse in this regard. Both at Penn and at Columbia, there's now efforts, and elsewhere, to ban some of the more virulent protests. But you see they've lost control, and you now have the new president of Columbia, Manoush Shafiq, very inelegantly, saying she's saddened by what's happening on her own campus, but at the same time ordering kids home to do classes virtually because things are out of control. It comes from many different things. It comes from the fact that elite American campuses and also elsewhere in the world, but particularly in the U.S., have completely succumbed to the progressive movement, much of which is good and fair enough, but a lot of which is really woke nonsense, ridiculous decolonization narratives that are extremely selective and in many cases ignorant. And in a way, you can say students will be students and they're always going to be more leftist when they are young, and in the end they grow up and get a job and sort of become conservative. But on this issue, I think it reflects two things. One, the West has a problem with the degree to which the extreme fringes of the progressive movement are now popular for a lot of different reasons, including social media, among the youth. And this is not just Israel. This is a skepticism about liberalism and democracy and capitalism and free markets. And even Western civilization is now a dirty word or a dirty concept among them now. You can hope they're going to grow up, or you can say, good Lord, what will be of these countries when Gen Z is sitting in the White House if it hasn't changed its tune? What is for sure, Israel, unless Israel changes many of its policies vis-a-vis the Palestinians, is going to be in trouble.
Dan, stay with us, but we have some breaking news right now coming out of northern Israel. Our correspondent Zach Anders is joining us live from the north. Zach, what's the latest developments happening on the northern front?
14 minutes ago, we got red alerts for Safad. This is where the Northern Command headquarters is located. And we're seeing images now, as well as reports within Israeli media, that as many as 20 rockets were fired on Safad. It's still too early within the last 15 minutes here to be able to say for certain if there were any direct hits. But from the media I'm seeing, it does appear that there have been some rockets that have fallen into some open areas. It looks like into the tree line in between a few homes. So smoke coming out of the trees we're seeing. I can't say for certain if there was anything there. This is a fairly major moment. Safad is, again, home to the Northern Command. It has come under fire a select few times over the last 6 months. And when Hezbollah has targeted Safad, it has been able to get through and hit the base. At least in the past, that's what's taken place. There have been injuries here in this area before. And I should stress that right now it's, again, within the last 15 minutes, so we don't have any initial reports of casualties or any reports of direct hits. And the images that we are seeing appear to have been rocket falls in open areas. Also seeing people report that there were interceptions overhead, so the Iron Dome activated there. And this does appear to be rockets, not drones. That would be an important distinction. So we'll stay on this, continuing to. We'd moved out of the area. Shlomi also got a red alert as well, which is where we were within the last hour when we joined you, Nicole, for the other live. We've since moved a bit, so we're going to evaluate here, see what's taking shape, because this alarm came across through the Western Galley up to the Galilee Finger and, of course, Safad, where Northern Command is.
Zach Anders, thanks so much for that update on the latest developments happening in northern Israel. We'll be coming back to you throughout the evening for more updates on this developing story. For now, we'll come back in studio. Dan, it seems like we continue to see this exchange of fire, cross-border attacks, but still, if Hezbollah does have the capabilities, which we've seen before, they're claiming to target and targeting Tzfat and these military headquarters, but when can the situation begin to change on the front if we continue to see these escalations?
Israel clearly faces a situation on a number of fronts, Iran being one of them, but relatedly, Hezbollah in the north, that is completely unacceptable. And, the world has somehow normalized this situation of rocket fire coming from another country that that country denies responsibility for, yet no one seems able to do anything about. So I think what's coming in a post-Gaza reality, and we can discuss how we can reach a post-Gaza reality, but the world is not going to make too many efforts to help Israel as long as Gaza goes on, I do fear. Once Gaza is over, if it ends on terms whereby Israel is looking reasonable, I think it is time to make a series of demands and to expect the West and the G7 and NATO and Israel's purported Sunni would-be allies to really back them and to move to a position of zero tolerance about these sorts of completely inadmissible behaviors, both from Hamas, if Hamas ends up staying in Gaza in one form or another, and certainly from Hezbollah, from the Houthis, and also from Iran. I think October 7th was a breaking point that led to a certain reality where you can support or oppose what Israel has done. I think that phase needs to start ending, and the new reality will require, I think, a more clever, more moderate, more strategic Israeli government, but also a Western position and an Arab position that is less forgiving of abominable misbehaviors that have been victimizing Israel. And by the way, there's a flip side of that as well, which is what we were discussing before. Israel's own actions in the West Bank that complicate the situation will have to change as well. I think we're looking for a reboot. And that may come about. And I think Passover may be a good time to contemplate that. It's a celebration of a family and community and renewal and reassessment and liberty and freedom. It may be time to reconsider Israel's policies in Gaza, prioritize bringing back the hostages, suffice with the degradation of Hamas, which has been considerable. If anyone in Israel wants to have revenge, suffice with the vengeance that they've taken, and probably pull out, unless they're prepared to change their strategic position and agree that the goal is to reinstall the PA, in which case that itself is a reboot. But for the time being, when Israel's government is clearly being straitjacketed by the extreme right, and a prime minister refuses to have a policy, I think the situation is no longer tenable. In the day after, when one way or another this current conflict in Gaza is over, I think we're ripe for a very significant reboot.
Certainly it could be the case. Dan Perry, I appreciate your analysis on all of these different developing events. Thank you.
My pleasure.